Top Med Talk. Hi, I'm Monty Mythen, Editor-in-Chief of Top Med Talk, coming to you live from the Institute of Sport, Exercise and Health at University College London. I'm here with some friends. Today we've been having the first Morpheus Consortium Symposium. If you want to know more about the Morpheus Consortium, which is a collaboration between Duke University Medical Centre in the United States of America, Southampton from the UK and University College London, please go to morpheusconsortium.org. We're not going to go into the details of that consortium at the moment. I'm going to introduce one of our guests, a familiar voice to Top Med Talk. That's Tim Miller, who's on the leadership team from Duke. Tim, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Monty.
As always, great to have you back here in London. Enjoying your trip so far?
Yeah, very good. Great discussions.
The last time we spoke, you were over. You were heading off to watch some cricket in Devon. How did that go? Was it as exciting as you hoped?
It was good. We had a cloudless sky. Somerset won the cricket. I was there with my dad and my brother, so very enjoyable.
Excellent. Our other guest now is a very special guest who hasn't been on Top Med Talk before. Is Thomas Sheeran, who's a professor from the Netherlands. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So where are you from in the Netherlands again? Sort of around the world, most people have heard of Amsterdam, I think, but you're from a different part.
I'm from the north of the country. Groningen is a nice 200,000 people, small village, if you will, but worth living. It's a nice environment, and it is a good university, amongst the top 100 ranked universities worldwide. So,
and the pictures you showed were beautiful. They look as though it's canal-based and old buildings. And
yeah, it's a small version of Amsterdam, you could say, but less crowded.
And you're not from there originally, are you?
No, I'm a German, and I worked in Germany for more than 20 years. But 8 years ago, I decided to go to the Netherlands to work there.
And you have a senior position. You're the prof there, the head
I'm one of the professors and the head of the cardiothoracic anesthesia department there.
Okay, and that's most of your clinical work is in adult cardiothoracics?
Yes, but I'm also doing non-cardiac cases. For the studies, I have to get some exposure to non-cardiac patients. So I'm mostly doing cardiac, but also non-cardiac cases.
I think you have some leadership positions in both the European Society of Anesthesia and Intensive Care Medicine. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's true. So for 3 years now, I'm the chair of the Scientific Subcommittee 14 from the European Society of Anesthesiology, which is monitoring equipment and ultrasound. And I'm also involved in the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine as chair of the cardiovascular dynamics section, which is a very big section within the ESICM, the intensive care world within Europe. And
one of the reasons we've invited you to come as a guest is you've been working on this new technology, commonly referred to as HPI, and we've been laughing about the different terms, which we can come back to. It's called a different thing in Europe to the USA. It's hypotension, either predictive or probability, either indicator or index. I'm not going to get into the discussion about what we call it for a moment, for a transatlantic discussion. Let's call it HPI, which is using artificial intelligence machine learning to tell us when we think our patients, under certain circumstances, may become hypotensive. Now, I'll come back to you on that in a second, Thomas. Tim, you gave us some lectures in the last couple of days about perioperative hypotension, which we've covered quite a lot recently in Top Med Talk, but just remind us why we're getting increasingly excited about it more recently.
Well, there's been a number of studies that have come out primarily from the Cleveland Clinic, but also from other institutions. In the era of big data, we're now able to look at these large databases, and we're able to see a fairly clear association, and it is just an association between hypotension and adverse outcomes, primarily acute kidney injury, but also MINS, or myocardial injury after non-cardiac surgery. And there seems to be a clear association with a mean blood pressure less than 65, with both the duration and the amount of hypotension correlating with adverse outcomes.
So we're not going to go into the great detail now. If people look up blood pressure, hypotension, Dan Sessler on Top Med Talk, they'll get a series of other podcasts. But the generally agreed big picture message is that based on currently available evidence, we should try not to leave our patients with a mean arterial pressure, adult patients undergoing major non-cardiac surgery, of less than 65, ideally under any circumstances. Is that a reasonable summary of the current state of the art?
Yes, I mean, it's not a fantastic evidence base, and say we've discussed this previously in Top Med Talk, but based on the current evidence, I think it seemed prudent to try and keep the mean greater than 65 for the majority of the time, if possible.
And there's a paper coming out, a meta-analysis, which we'll cover on Top Med Talk in the days and weeks to follow, a meta-analysis of perioperative blood pressure, And one of the core messages in there is, although there are other thresholds and duration, the 65 to 60 number still holds up. You can't say with any great degree of certainty, but from pragmatically at the moment, it looks like a thing to avoid. Now, Thomas, that 65 number is the one that this HPI idea is based on. Is that right? Yes.
So the model was based on defining hypotension with that threshold, less than 65, as opposed to non-hypotensive states, which were defined as a mean arterial pressure above 75. So to have a clear distinction between hypotension and non-hypotension.
So this new HPI number, which we've now been exposed to, which has been in the hands of a small number of practitioners in Europe for about a year and has just been approved by the FDA, the regulator in the United States of America. What we've been looking at is a number that goes from a scale of 0 to 100.
Right.
And the higher the number, the greater the likelihood that the patient will have a hypotensive episode, i.e. below this level of 65, in the minutes to follow.
In the near future, that's right. And the higher the likelihood, or the higher the number is, also the shorter is the time that this event is likely to occur.
Okay, so how did they develop that technology? This is the bit that they call the machine learning, artificial intelligence sort of idea.
They took historical data from patients, from intensive care patients, but also from the OR setting, and they looked at the arterial waveform very, very narrowly. So they divided the arterial waveform into different parts and looked very precisely at these multiple millions of waveforms that they collected in those patients, and they fed the machine learning algorithm and developed an algorithm, the best predictive model, which can predict, based on these waveform features, when a hypotensive event will occur within the next minutes.
And there's a threshold that's been agreed where it reaches a number, I think, of 85, this HPI. Right. And above that, there's a colour change in the indicator, and effectively there's an alarm. It says, now's the time to really concentrate because it looks like hypotension is going to happen soon.
Yes. And the nice thing is, at the same time, you have the opportunity to look at a secondary screen at the monitor, which gives you some hints which might be the origin for the hypertension, because hypertension, there are different types of hypertension and different origins of hypertension which need a specific treatment. So this secondary screen might help you to define which is the cause of hypertension in your particular patient so that you can choose the right therapy.
This is, at the moment, is a specific Edwards Life Sciences technology approved by the regulators, which is available via the Edwards platform of hemodynamic monitoring.
Right.
So if the number goes to a particular level, you go to this so-called secondary screen and it says it looks like it's probably a preload problem, volume.
Right.
It looks like it might be contractility of the heart. It looks like it might be afterload. So maybe it's volume, maybe it's an inotrope, maybe it's a vasopressor.
Right.
And I think we saw some worked examples of that. So, Tim, you're relatively new to being exposed to this. You've had a good dose of it, should we put it that way, in the last couple of days. Give us your thoughts.
I think it's very exciting, and I think some of the data that Thomas shared with us was very interesting, looking at both the historical data that was provided by Edwards Life Science and also your own data and from Simon Davies at York, looking at particularly your own data that when you're blinded to being able to see this HPI, and then you've looked at a number of cases and then looked whether the HPI indicator was predictive of hypotension, and comparing it particularly to changes in blood pressure, because we often think we can tell when the patient is going to be hypotensive because we can see the trend in the mean blood pressure going down, and we can predict when the patient is going to be hypotensive when we see that trend. And the data that you shared, Thomas, seemed to show that the use of HPI was much better than just looking at trends in mean blood pressure. And I think that's very interesting. And, I'm excited to try the indicator myself when we can get it available at Duke.
One of the analogies we've been given, it's a bit like the weather predictive algorithms on our mobile phone application. So we can look out the window here in London at the moment, and it's a rare treat. It's beautiful and sunny, and we can look up to the sky and see no rain clouds, and we think it's probably not going to rain at the moment. But the mobile application might tell us that at 6 o'clock there's a 90% chance it's going to pour, so we might take a different attitude to our raincoat and our use of an umbrella. Is that the idea?
Exactly. So this is a good example of machine learning algorithms used in daily practice, and we are used to that. There are other examples, for example, the deep face face recognition from Facebook, which is as precise as the human eye to recognize faces. And there are others like Google Translate using deep learning algorithms to develop, to improve the translation of what you type into the machine.
So you've been using it for quite a while now. Are you ready to go mainstream with the technology?
I think we still have to learn a lot, particularly about these secondary screen variables which are offered. There are things like dynamic arterial elastance, which is not familiar to the normal anesthetists, and this has to be explained and understood. And I also had a hard time to understand what this really means. And also the contractility parameters that are given have to be evaluated before we can really apply it in general practice.
Now, the HPI has been approved by regulators in Europe and the USA. So a group of people who are very hard to convince that things are worthwhile doing have been convinced that this is worthy. It has value. I think what we've all been discussing is now we potentially have this, and I think we're going to see a lot of growth of artificial intelligence, machine learning, decision support. What are we going to do with it? Tim, as I say, someone who's just been exposed to it, you're a leader back home at Duke. If you can get your hands on it, what do you think you might do?
Yeah, I think the rollout is going to be important, and I agree with Thomas. I think the rollout has to be cautious. I think we have to be aware that this device could potentially be useful, but it also could potentially change practice. And you have mentioned that your use of inotropes perhaps has increased with this technology, right, using the secondary screen.
Right.
So like any new technology, I think you have to be wary of unintended consequences. Firstly, that people use the technology correctly, and B, that the treatments or the changes in management that they have are going to be beneficial. So we haven't got outcome data at the moment, and obviously that's what we eventually need. So I think we have to be cautious how we use this, but early indicators seem to be that it could be a useful addition.
You worried that we might be too cautious? You can argue in healthcare you should never be too cautious, but sometimes our obsession with evidence-based medicine, of which I'm an advocate of that approach, can stifle discovery through serendipity. I mean, its value has been determined in one way, sense and form by regulators, and they've said it has potential value. Where do we get that balance right?
I mean, that's the challenge, I guess. Yeah. I agree. I mean, you can be too cautious, but I do think that it's new, and we have a history, perhaps, when new things come out of jumping on the bandwagon, and before we know it, it's 100% use. You know, the PA catheter and many other examples. And then we get the evidence that perhaps the benefit wasn't as much as we thought, or we were incorrectly using the technologies. I think a degree of caution is necessary, that we don't just go all out in embracing this new technology before we at least have some evidence.
So I think at the moment it's mainly been put in the hands of sort of super users. Isn't it like the sort of test pilot equivalent? People who are unlikely to make rash, sudden turns and crash the plane. Is that
the company calls it a targeted market release, so only a group of people who are interested and understand the mechanisms behind it and got special training are able to use it, just to learn from it and to learn from mistakes from the past where a new technology was just brought to the market, given to everyone without proper training, how to use it properly, and this may cause more harm than benefit to the patients.
And there's literature out there to read about this now. I think there are chapters, and the recent validation of the Edwards algorithm is just, I think, in press.
Yes, it has just been released online in anesthesiology, the validation paper from Edwards, and it will be published in the October issue, as far as I know.
For those people who want to get into the granular detail, that includes how they developed and validated the algorithms and
exactly.
The development of it.
In the supplemental material, you will find many information about the machine learning background and the data populations that were included into that development.
And there are some trials ongoing of various different guises to determine how we bring this into the clinical environment.
Exactly.
I'm sure lots of us are enthusiastic to see if we can get exposed to it. I've been lucky enough to be exposed to it in some quite controlled environments. I think, Tim, you're going to get more exposed to it soon. Exciting times. And we've been also hearing about other AI developments growing rapidly in healthcare. We heard about some diagnostic tools. There was a paper in Nature Science last year from one of our colleagues here who was telling us about how they've managed to outperform the clinicians in making diagnosis. It's all happening. So the machines are taking over. I think they'll take over in time to save us, Tim. If I get knocked down by a driverless electric car, will the machine save me?
Luckily, we still have to use our brain a little bit, I think. But I think they can be a great help, and I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
Tom,
you think the future, how long until this becomes the new norm?
There are people even going a step ahead, so they're developing or thinking about developing closed-loop algorithms which use this information to feed the pumps of the fluid administration to get a kind of closed-loop treatment of the patient, like an autopilot in an airplane, which keeps you smooth and a certain height to have a smooth hemodynamic profile throughout the procedure.
Great. Well, Thomas, thank you very much indeed. Congratulations to you and everyone who's been working on this wonderful technology it develops. It does sound to me as though it's part of the future, and the future is getting closer the whole time. Tim, always great to see you. Thanks for coming along. Very excited about this ongoing collaboration between our institutions, Southampton and UCL in the UK and Duke in the USA. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you, Monty.
Thank you very much.
Top Med Talk.